At 2,300 hours, December 11, 1944, the night over Ormoc Bay was completely black. No moon. No horizon. Just the sound of water moving slowly against broken concrete and the distant echo of war that never truly stopped. Corporal James Mackenzie crouched low behind a shattered seawall, his uniform damp from sea spray and sweat. His fingers rested on the cold steel of his rifle, but his eyes weren't on land. They were fixed on the water. Three shapes. Silent. Moving. At first, they looked like shadows playing tricks in the distance. But shadows don't move with purpose. These did. Mackenzie narrowed his eyes. Ships. He exhaled slowly. He had been in combat for 2 months. Long enough to understand fear. Long enough to know when something didn't belong. And this didn't. Because the men of the 77th Infantry Division weren't supposed to be watching the ocean for enemy ships. That was the Navy's job. But nothing about Leyte had gone according to plan. Not since the moment they hit the beaches. The 77th wasn't like other divisions. They weren't young, fast, or aggressive in the way commanders usually wanted. They were older. Average age, 32. Factory workers. Taxi drivers. Accountants. Men pulled out of normal life and thrown into one of the most brutal theaters of war on Earth. Other divisions mocked them. Called them slow. Called them outdated. Called them the old bastards. But the Japanese had a different name for them. A name that translated roughly into something far darker. Demons who don't take prisoners. And the numbers backed it up. Across the Pacific War, American forces captured prisoners at a low rate. But the 77th captured almost none. They didn't waste time taking prisoners. They destroyed everything in front of them. Efficiently. Methodically. Brutally. Now they were here, on the western coast of Leyte, in the ruined remains of Ormoc. A town that had stopped being a town days ago. Burned structures. Collapsed buildings. Blackened palm trees. The smell of smoke still hanging in the air. They had taken it fast. Faster than the Japanese expected. Under the command of Andrew D. Bruce, the division had landed south of Ormoc just days earlier, December 7th. The Japanese had expected a slow push through mountains. Bruce gave them something else entirely. A direct strike. 72 hours later, Ormoc was in American hands. But taking the town was only the beginning. Holding it, that was the real fight. Because every single night, the Japanese came back. Not in daylight. Not in force. But quietly. Through the sea. Small convoys. Barges. Transports. Slipping through darkness, trying to land reinforcements before dawn. They had to. Because their entire position on Leyte depended on it. Far to the north, Tomoyuki Yamashita had made a decision. Leyte would not be abandoned. It would be held. At any cost. And that meant feeding men into the island, no matter how many died getting there. Mackenzie watched the shapes grow larger. He could hear them now. Engines. Steady. Controlled. They weren't rushing. They didn't need to. They believed the night belonged to them. Behind Mackenzie, further inland, something else waited. Not infantry. Not artillery. Something that wasn't meant for this kind of fight at all. M10 Tank Destroyers. Heavy machines built for Europe. Built to kill German armor. Not ships. Never ships. Each one carried a 3-inch gun capable of punching through steel at long range. But no one had ever tested that gun against a moving naval target. Not like this. Not from shore. The crews had their orders. Track the ships. Wait for illumination. Fire on command. That was it. No backup plan. No guarantee it would work. Mackenzie checked his watch. 23:55. 5 minutes. The distance between the ships and the shore was closing fast now. Less than 1,000 yards. Close enough to matter. Close enough that if they landed troops, everything the 77th had fought for over the last week would be undone. The jungle would fill with fresh enemy soldiers. The fighting would start all over again. More days. More deaths. More bodies. The air felt heavier. Time slowed. Every man along the waterfront was waiting for the same thing. Midnight. A single mortar round launched from behind the lines. It climbed silently into the sky. then burst. White phosphorus exploded above the bay. And suddenly, night turned into day. The entire bay lit up in a harsh, ghostly glow. And there it was. The lead ship. Exposed. Vulnerable. A Japanese transport. Mid-sized. Steel hull. Already moving toward the shore. Its ramps were lowering. Troops were already preparing to unload. They had no idea they'd just been revealed. For 30 seconds, they were visible. 30 seconds of light. 30 seconds to act. The first M10 fired. The sound ripped through the night like thunder. The recoil slammed the vehicle backward. The shell crossed the water in just over a second. And hit. Direct impact. Right above the waterline. The round punched through the hull like it wasn't even there. Steel gave way instantly. Inside the ship. Explosion. Fire. Chaos. The blast tore through the cargo hold, ripping metal apart and shredding everything in its path. Water began flooding in immediately. Violent. Unstoppable. The ship tilted. 7 degrees to starboard. Men on the ramps froze. Others ran. Some jumped. Inside the vessel, soldiers scrambled toward exits as the interior filled with smoke and seawater. They hadn't even made it to shore yet. And already, they were dying. The flare above began to fade. Darkness threatened to return. But then, another flare. The bay lit up again. Brighter. Longer. And now the ship was sinking. Its stern lower than before. Water pouring in through a massive hole torn open by a weapon never meant to hit it. The M10 fired again. Second shot. More precise. Lower. Below the waterline. Another impact. Another breach. Now the ship was taking on water from 2 points. There was no saving it. It was already over. But out beyond it, more shapes. More ships. Still coming. Still committed. Still moving forward, straight into the kill zone. And along the shattered waterfront of Ormoc. The old bastards were ready. The burning transport was still settling into the sand when the next shapes emerged fully into the light. They had seen everything. The explosion. The fire. The ship dying in front of them. And still, they didn't turn back. Out in the glowing water of Ormoc Bay, the remaining Japanese vessels kept moving forward. Orders were orders. And retreat was not an option. On the shoreline, the men of the 77th Infantry Division didn't waste time trying to understand that kind of thinking. They didn't need to. All that mattered was what was coming next. Another flare climbed into the sky. Another burst of white light. And now the entire battlefield was visible. 3 barges. Low in the water. Packed with troops. And behind them, a second transport. Larger than the first. Still pushing forward through the chaos. Inside one of the M10s, the gunner adjusted his sight. No hesitation. No confusion. Just calculation. Range, 600 yards. Movement, slow, steady approach. Wind, negligible. The crosshairs settled. The commander gave the order. Fire. The second transport was hit before its crew even understood they were under direct fire from land. The shell struck the bow. Penetration was instant. The explosion inside the forward compartment was catastrophic. Men packed tightly together had no space to react. No space to escape. The blast tore through them in a fraction of a second. Those who survived the initial impact stumbled into a nightmare of fire, smoke, and shrapnel. But the ship kept moving. Discipline. Training. Or something deeper. The captain held his course. Straight toward the beach. As if reaching land, no matter the cost, was the only thing that mattered. Then the American artillery joined in. From behind the lines, 105mm howitzers opened fire. Unlike the M10 rounds, these shells weren't designed to pierce. They were designed to destroy everything around them. The first shell struck the upper structure. The second slammed into the deck. The third hit near the waterline. The explosion didn't just damage the ship. It tore it open. Metal peeled back. The hull split. Water surged in like a living force. Still, the transport pushed forward. Another 200 yards. It couldn't go any further. The captain drove it aground. 400 yards from shore. Too far to unload safely. too shallow to maneuver, too damaged to survive. And now, the troops had no choice. They jumped into dark water. Too deep, too chaotic, too deadly. Some tried to swim. Others disappeared instantly beneath the surface. And from the shoreline, machine guns opened fire. Heavy .50 caliber rounds tore across the water, each burst cutting lines through the waves, each impact finding bodies. Men struggled in oil-slicked water, weighed down by gear, panic, and wounds. Very few made it closer. Even fewer reached land. Behind them, the first transport, now barely visible above water, finally gave in. It slipped beneath the surface completely. Gone. Hundreds of men with it. But the fight wasn't over. Not even close. The 3 barges spread out. It was a smart move. Split the fire. Force the Americans to choose targets. Create confusion. Maybe, just maybe, one of them would get through. But the shoreline of Ormoc wasn't confused. It was prepared. Along the coast, the guns of the 7th AAA Battalion were already in position. 40mm anti-aircraft guns. Designed to shoot planes out of the sky. Now aimed flat. At sea level. The first barge entered their range. 600 yards. 500. 400. Fire. The night exploded again. But this time it wasn't one gun. It was all of them. A storm of 40mm shells ripped across the water. Each round detonating on impact. The barge didn't stand a chance. Wood splintered instantly. Metal fittings twisted apart. Men were thrown into the air, or into the water, before they even understood what hit them. In seconds, the barge was gone, reduced to floating wreckage. And silence. The second barge tried to turn. The helmsman reacted fast. Hard rudder. Attempt to escape. But speed meant nothing now. Not under direct fire. One of the M10 crews tracked the movement. Adjusted slightly. Fired. The shell struck the center of the barge. And split it clean in half. Both sections sank almost immediately. The water filled with debris and men. And then, gunfire. Short bursts. Controlled. Precise. The third barge kept coming. Straight in. No attempt to turn. No hesitation. Full speed toward the beach. It was the closest one yet. Machine gun fire tore into it as it moved. Rounds punched through the hull. Men dropped before they could even stand. Mortar shells landed around it, throwing water and fragments into the air. So, it reached the shallows. The hull scraped against the bottom. Grounded. 70 yards from shore. Close enough to try. The troops jumped out. Water up to their waists. Weapons held high. Running forward. For a moment, it looked like they might actually make it. Then the machine guns found them. Interlocking fields of fire crossed the waterline. Every angle covered. Every approach calculated. The men in the water had nowhere to go. No cover. No support. No chance. They fell where they stood. One after another. Until there was no movement left. Only ripples. And silence. 18 minutes. That's how long it took. 5 vessels entered Ormoc Bay. 5 vessels were destroyed. Hundreds of troops never reached the shore. On the American side, not a single man lost. Behind the lines, Andrew D. Bruce stood in his command post, listening to reports come in one after another. He didn't celebrate. Didn't react. He just listened. Numbers. Rounds fired. Targets destroyed. Positions holding. It was exactly what he believed in. Firepower. Precision. Efficiency. The math made sense. And the math said something very clear. The Japanese could not land here anymore. Not without losing everything. The shoreline of Ormoc had become something else entirely. Not just a defensive line. The trap. A place where ships came to die. But even as the guns fell silent, even as the water calmed, radio operators picked up something new. More signals. More movement. More ships. Still coming. The guns along the shoreline were still hot when the next reports came in. More movement in the north. Faint engine noise carried across the water. Not imagination. Not nerves. The Japanese were still trying. Inside the command post, Andrew D. Bruce stood over a rough map lit by a dim lantern. Officers around him spoke in short, controlled bursts, ranges, bearings, estimated numbers. No panic. Just calculation. That was how the 77th fought. Not with emotion. With numbers. Outside, the men returned to their positions without being told. Reload. No cheering. No celebration. Because they all understood one thing. If the enemy was still coming, then the night wasn't over. Along the coast, the silhouettes of the M10 Tank Destroyers sat in partial cover, their long barrels still pointed toward the bay. Crewmen worked in silence. Spent casings cleared. Fresh rounds loaded. Each shell handled carefully, deliberately. 15 rounds had already changed the course of the night. More might be needed. Behind them, mortar teams prepared additional illumination rounds. The most important weapon on the field right now wasn't the gun. It was light. Without it, everything disappeared. And the enemy could slip through again. Minutes passed. The kind of minutes that stretch longer than they should. The kind where every sound feels louder. Every shadow feels closer. Two shapes. Smaller this time. Lower in the water. Barges. Approaching cautiously. Slower than before. They had learned something. But not enough. A flare shot upward. Light flooded the bay again. The barges froze in place for just a fraction of a second. Long enough. The M10 fired first. One shot. One hit. The lead barge shattered almost instantly. The second tried to turn away. But it was already too late. 40mm guns opened up. The water between the barge and the shore turned into a wall of explosions. Fragments ripped through wood, metal, and flesh. Within seconds, both barges were gone. No survivors reached the beach. The radios went quiet again. No more movement. No more engines. No more attempts. That night, the Japanese stopped. But not for long. The next evening, December 12th, the pattern repeated. Darkness. Silence. Then movement. Another attempt. Another convoy trying to slip through the same waters that had just become a graveyard. But now, everything had changed. The Americans weren't reacting anymore. They were waiting. Ready. Prepared for exactly this. As soon as the shapes appeared, the flares went up. Faster this time. More controlled. More precise. The moment the light hit, the guns opened fire. No hesitation. No warning. The barges never even got close. They were destroyed before reaching 500 yards. Estimated casualties: 100. American losses: 0. December 13th. One more attempt. Bigger. A larger transport. Heavier. Slower. Carrying hundreds of troops. Escorted by multiple barges. Whoever planned this believed size might make the difference. More men. More weight. More determination. But they were sailing into the same equation. And the equation hadn't changed. As the convoy entered the bay, flares ignited the sky. The water turned white again. The transport was exposed. Perfect target. The first M10 round hit within seconds. Then artillery followed. Then anti-aircraft guns. Everything firing together. Coordinated. Overwhelming. The transport didn't last 12 minutes. It broke apart under sustained fire. Flooded. Collapsed. The escort barges never even made it close enough to matter. They were destroyed at distance. One after another. By the time the water went dark again, it was over. Estimated casualties: 500 or more. American losses: still 0. By the end of the third night, something shifted. Not on the battlefield, but in command. Far from Ormoc, Tomoyuki Yamashita received the reports. Numbers. Losses. Patterns. 3 nights. 3 attempts. More than 1,000 troops lost. Ships destroyed before reaching land. No progress. No breakthrough. Just failure. Repeated. Predictable. Mathematical. And Yamashita understood mathematics. He understood what those numbers meant. Ormoc was no longer an entry point. It was a dead end. A place where reinforcements didn't arrive. They disappeared. The decision came quietly. No dramatic announcement. No final order shouted across a command room. Just a shift in strategy. Reinforcement attempts to Ormoc stopped. On the ground, the men of the 77th Infantry Division didn't know when that decision was made. They only knew what they could see. No more ships. No more barges. No more movement in the night. For the first time since taking Ormoc, the sea was empty. And that meant something important. The Japanese forces inland were now alone. Cut off. No supplies. No reinforcements. No escape. On December 14th, the division moved into the mountains, into the jungle, where the remaining Japanese forces were still holding out. The 307th Infantry Regiment took the lead. Under the command of Aubrey Newman, they advanced through terrain that most commanders would have avoided. Dense jungle, steep ridges, narrow paths, the kind of ground where ambushes were expected, where visibility dropped to almost nothing, where every step forward could be the wrong one. But the 77th didn't fight the way others did. They didn't charge. They didn't rush. They moved around strong points, cut supply lines, used artillery before infantry, firepower before risk. The same principle that sank ships, now cleared mountains, village by village, ridge by ridge. The Japanese tried to hold key positions, road junctions, high ground, natural choke points. But it didn't work, because the 77th didn't attack where they were expected. They went around, through terrain the Japanese believed was impassable. And that broke the defense. By December 25th, Christmas Day, the advancing elements of the 77th linked up with forces moving south. Leyte was secured. The campaign was over. Official numbers would later tell the story. Tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers killed. Minimal prisoners taken. American losses. Significant, but controlled. Measured. Nothing like the disasters seen in earlier Pacific battles. But those numbers, they didn't include the ships. They didn't include the men who died in the water. They didn't include what happened on the night of December 11th. Because what happened that night didn't fit into any standard category. It wasn't a naval battle. It wasn't a land battle. It was something else entirely. Something no one had planned for. Something no one had trained for. And something that had never happened before. Weeks later, investigators would arrive. Orders from the United States Army. Simple objective: verify the claims. Because the reports sounded impossible. Infantry units, destroying naval vessels, using tank destroyers. It didn't match doctrine. It didn't match history. So they checked. At low tide, the wrecks became visible. Dark shapes beneath shallow water. Silent evidence. They examined the first transport. Hull penetrations. The final phase of the Leyte campaign was not marked by dramatic breakthroughs or sweeping maneuvers. It was defined by attrition, exhaustion, and inevitability. By late December 1944, the Japanese defensive network had collapsed into isolated pockets scattered across the mountains north of Ormoc. Cut off from resupply, deprived of reinforcement, and hunted relentlessly by American patrols, these units fought on with the same discipline that had defined them from the beginning. But discipline alone could not overcome mathematics. The 77th Infantry Division advanced methodically, applying the same principles that had carried them from Guam to Ormoc. They avoided unnecessary risk. They bypassed strong points when possible. They used artillery, mortars, and direct fire weapons to eliminate resistance before committing infantry. Every engagement followed a pattern. Locate the enemy. Fix their position. Destroy them with firepower. Move forward. The men of the division had become experts at this process. What had once required coordination and planning now happened almost automatically. Squad leaders understood when to advance and when to hold. Platoon commanders knew how to position supporting weapons without waiting for orders. It was no longer training. It was instinct. The Japanese forces opposing them were remnants of once organized formations. Elements of the Japanese 1st Division, along with survivors from other shattered units, attempted to hold key terrain features along the Libongo Road and surrounding high ground. These positions were well chosen. Steep slopes, dense jungle, limited avenues of approach, perfect terrain for defense. But the 77th had faced this before. Instead of attacking head-on, they maneuvered. Small units moved through terrain the Japanese believed impassable. Patrols cut supply trails that no longer carried supplies. Artillery observers climbed ridgelines under cover of darkness to direct fire onto concealed positions. The result was predictable. Japanese defenses were isolated, then destroyed piece by piece. On December 25, 1944, the 77th Infantry Division linked up with elements of the 1st Cavalry Division advancing south. The junction marked the effective end of organized Japanese resistance on Leyte. Christmas Day. There were no celebrations, no speeches, no sense of victory in the traditional sense. Only the quiet understanding that the mission was complete. The official campaign statistics would later summarize the outcome with cold precision. The 77th Infantry Division had killed 19,456 Japanese soldiers on Leyte. They had captured 124. They had lost 543 men killed in action and 1,469 wounded. A kill ratio of 36-1. But numbers never tell the full story. They do not capture the nights spent under rain in foxholes. They do not capture the silence after artillery fire. They do not capture the weight carried by men who survived when others did not. After Leyte, the division was given a brief period to reorganize. Replacements arrived. Equipment was repaired. Weapons were cleaned, inspected, and prepared for the next operation. The M10 Tank Destroyers remained part of the division's combat strength. Their barrels showed wear from sustained firing. Tracks had been replaced. Engines rebuilt. They looked like the rest of the division. Used, worn, but operational. No one spoke about the night at Ormoc Bay. There was no need. Everyone who had been there understood what had happened. And more importantly, they understood that it was over. That kind of opportunity would not come again. The next assignment came quickly. Okinawa. The final stepping stone to Japan. The largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War. And the bloodiest. In March 1945, the 77th Infantry Division landed on the small islands west of Okinawa. Their mission was to secure these positions and eliminate Japanese forces that could threaten the main invasion. The fighting was sharp but brief. Within 5 days, the islands were cleared. Japanese casualties exceeded 600. American losses were minimal by comparison. The pattern held. Firepower. Discipline. Efficiency. On April 16, the division landed on Ie Shima. The island was small, but heavily defended. Every ridge, every cave, every approach had been fortified. The Japanese understood what was coming. They intended to make the Americans pay for every yard. The fighting on Ie Shima was close, brutal, and personal. There were no wide maneuvers here. No room to bypass. Every position had to be taken. Every cave cleared. Every bunker destroyed. Flamethrowers became essential. Satchel charges were used at point-blank range. Machine guns fired into openings only a few feet away. On April 18, 1945, war correspondent Ernie Pyle was killed while accompanying troops from the division. He had spent weeks with them. He had written about them. He understood them. His death hit the division harder than any statistic could measure. The Japanese had abandoned the idea of defending the beaches. Instead, they had constructed a layered defensive network in the southern part of the island. Tunnels. Reverse slope positions. Artillery hidden where naval guns could not reach. The 77th was assigned a sector along this defensive line. Their objective was simple. Destroy enemy positions. Keep moving. The terrain made everything difficult. Steep ridges. Mud that swallowed boots. Rain that never seemed to stop. Visibility measured in yards. One position stood out. The escarpment. A near-vertical ridge defended by machine guns, mortars, and entrenched infantry. It could not be bypassed. It had to be taken. The division approached it the same way they approached everything else. Artillery first. Hours of bombardment. Shells pounding the ridge. Turning rock and soil into shattered debris. Then infantry. Slow. Deliberate. using ladders, ropes, anything available to climb. Every foot gained under fire. Every position contested. It took days, but the result was inevitable. The Japanese defenders were killed or driven out. The escarpment fell. From there, the division pushed toward Shuri, the center of Japanese resistance. They fought alongside Marines and other army units. They did not talk much about what they had done. Not about Guam. Not about Leyte. Not about Okinawa. And certainly not about the night at Ormoc Bay. Historians would later document it, analyze it, confirm it, that an American infantry division had used M10 tank destroyers to sink Japanese vessels, that armored fighting vehicles had engaged naval targets, that it had happened once, and only once. But for the men who were there, it was never about history. It was about the mission. 5 ships, 18 minutes, 15 rounds, and then moving on to the next fight. The 77th Infantry Division was never supposed to be extraordinary. But war does not follow expectations. It reveals capability. And sometimes, it creates something entirely unexpected. On one night in December 1944, on the shores of Ormoc Bay, a group of soldiers did something no one had done before. And no one would ever do again.